For most of my life, I believed responsibility was the same thing as direction. If I worked hard, that if I stayed consistent, that if I didn't make reckless choices, then eventually, meaning would catch up. No one ever told me that you can build an entire life and still feel like a guest inside it. I was 36 when that realization hit me. Not during a crisis, not during loss, but on a quiet Tuesday evening, standing in my own kitchen, holding a glass of water I didn't even remember pouring. The apartment was clean, organized, exactly how I planned it, and somehow empty. From the outside, my life made sense. Stable career, predictable schedule, that a reputation for reliability. I was the guy people trusted. At work, they came to me when something needed to be handled without drama. That I am my family. I was the one who had it together. In relationships, I was described as safe. I used to think that was a compliment. I didn't chase chaos. I avoided it. And in doing so, I avoided a lot of things that required risk, including self-examination. I followed a path that was respectable, not personal. School, career, promotion. Each step logical. None of them questioned. I didn't wake up one day feeling lost. It was more subtle. I stopped feeling excited. Stopped anticipating anything beyond the next obligation. I told myself that was adulthood, maturity. But deep down, something fell unfinished. I noticed that most of my relationships, they were steady, kind, predictable, and shallow in a way I couldn't name. I listened, that I supported, that I showed up. But I rarely revealed anything that felt uncertain or unpolished. I offered competence instead of intimacy, and people accepted it until they didn't. The woman I was dating at the time never accused me of anything. She simply said, one evening, "It feels like you're living a life that makes sense, but not one that feels like yours." That sentence lodged itself somewhere deep, because she wasn't wrong. After she left, I told myself it was just incompatibility, different needs, different timing. But the quiet that followed her absence felt heavier than loneliness. It felt like confrontation. That was when I started noticing how carefully constructed my life was. Every habit optimized, every routine efficient, every choice justified. But nothing felt chosen. It all felt inherited. I thought back to who I had been in my 20s. The version of me who had opinions, curiosity, restlessness. Somewhere along the way, I had traded exploration for stability without realizing it was a trade. The turning point came unexpectedly. An old friend invited me to a small gathering. Nothing formal. I almost declined. Then something in me said yes. That night, I met her. Not in a dramatic way. No instant chemistry, and a lightning strike. Just a conversation that didn't feel performative. Her name was Claire. She asked questions that weren't strategic. What do you enjoy when no one is watching? When was the last time you surprised yourself? What part of your life feels the least alive? I laughed at first, then realized I didn't have answers ready. She wasn't impressed by my accomplishments. She was curious about my hesitations. And that made me uncomfortable in a way that felt honest. We talked for hours. Not intensely. Intentionally. There was no pressure to impress, only an invitation to reflect. When the night ended, I didn't feel excited. I felt awake. Driving home, I realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, someone had interacted with me as if there was more beneath the surface, and I had felt exposed instead of flattered. In the days that followed, I couldn't stop thinking about her questions. They echoed in moments I usually fill with noise. On my commute, while cooking, before sleep. They weren't intrusive. They were patient. I reached out to her again, not because I wanted a relationship, but because I wanted to understand why her presence had unsettled something I'd worked so hard to keep organized. We met for coffee, then another. Each time, she gently dismantled the version of me I presented, not by criticizing it, but by asking what it cost me to maintain it. "You seem very capable," she said once. But capability isn't the same as alignment. That word, alignment, stayed with me, because for the first time, I realized my life might be functional, but misaligned. I didn't know where this was going. I only knew something had begun. Not a romance. A reckoning. After meeting Claire, My life didn't suddenly change. That's the lie most stories tell. That awareness arrives like lightning. For me, it arrived like erosion. Slow, quiet, unavoidable. I went back to my routines. Morning coffee at the same time, the same route to work, the same conversations filled with safe answers. From the outside, nothing had shifted. Inside, everything had. Claire didn't push her way into my life. She appeared occasionally, a message here, a coffee there. Always optional, never demanding. And that was what made her presence disruptive. She wasn't trying to replace my life. She was simply standing beside it, asking whether it fit. One afternoon, she asked if I wanted to take a walk instead of sitting at a cafe. We wandered without direction. At one point, she said, "You move like someone who's always arriving somewhere." I laughed, then stopped, because she was right. I was always moving toward the next task, the next responsibility, the next measurable outcome. Rarely toward myself. "You've built something impressive," she continued. "But do you enjoy living inside it?" That question followed me home. It followed me into meetings, into conversations, into sleep. I started noticing how much of my life was based on avoidance disguised as discipline. I avoided uncertainty by planning, avoided disappointment by lowering expectations, avoided desire by calling it impractical. I told myself I was being mature, but maturity had slowly turned into emotional anesthesia. The more aware I became, the more uncomfortable I felt. At work, I noticed how easily I agreed with decisions I didn't care about that I in friendships, how often I played the role expected of me that I in relationships, how I offered security instead of truth. People trusted me, but they didn't know me, and I had mistaken that for peace. Claire noticed a shift before I named it. "You're quieter," she said one evening. "Am I?" I asked. "Yes," she replied, "but not withdrawn. Listening." That distinction mattered. I told her I felt unsettled, that something I relied on for years, my sense of control, was starting to feel fragile. She didn't reassure me. She said, "That's usually where honesty begins." The thought scared me. Control had been my armor. Without it, I didn't know who I was. One night, I stayed late at the office, staring at a screen I wasn't really seeing. I realized I couldn't remember the last decision I'd made purely because I wanted to. Not because it was responsible. Not because it made sense. Because it felt right. That realization landed heavily. I started pulling back from Claire. Not intentionally. Instinctively. Awareness requires energy. And I wasn't sure I had enough to keep questioning everything. She noticed. Again, without accusation. "You don't have to keep meeting me," she said gently. "But don't disappear without asking yourself why." That sentence stopped me. Because I knew the answer. I was afraid. Afraid that if I kept peeling back the layers, I'd find a life I didn't recognize. Afraid that I'd realize I had stayed too long in a version of myself built for approval, not fulfillment. Afraid that change would cost me everything I'd worked for. I told her this. All of it. Not eloquently, but honestly. She listened. The way people listen when they're not waiting to respond. "Awareness doesn't demand action," she said. "It just removes excuses." That stayed with me. The following weeks felt heavier. Not because anything external went wrong, but because I could no longer ignore the dissonance. The gap between who I was and who I felt capable of becoming. I began journaling. Not poetically. Brutally. Pages filled with sentences like, "I don't know what I want. I chose safety over curiosity. I confused responsibility with identity." Writing didn't solve anything, but it stripped away illusions. I saw how often I had outsourced meaning to expectations. Family expectations, cultural expectations, professional expectations. I had followed rules I never consciously agreed to. One evening, Claire asked, "If no one were watching, what would you change first?" I didn't answer, because for the first time, I understood the question fully, and the answer terrified me. I realized that alignment would require loss. Loss of certainty, loss of image, loss of the version of me people relied on. Stability wasn't free. It had cost me curiosity. As I walked home that night, I felt something unfamiliar. Not excitement, not dread, permission. The fragile permission to admit that the life I'd built wasn't wrong, but it wasn't complete. I didn't know what would come next. I only knew this. I could no longer pretend I was satisfied. And once that truth enters your life, everything you've carefully constructed starts asking to be questioned. Once the question entered my life, it refused to leave. The question wasn't dramatic. The IT didn't demand an immediate answer. It simply stood there, quietly asking, who is this life actually for? I tried to ignore it at first. I fill my days with motion, meetings, errands, responsibilities, anything that could give the illusion of progress without requiring change. But the question followed me, into conversations that felt rehearsed, into routines that felt hollow, into moments of quiet I used to enjoy. Stability had stopped feeling neutral. It had become heavy. Claire didn't appear during this phase. Not because she disappeared, because she didn't need a push. She had already done what she came to do. She had introduced awareness. What I did with it was up to me. The breaking point came on an ordinary afternoon. A meeting I had attended dozens of times before. The same discussions, the same conclusions. I looked around the room and realized something unsettling. I could predict my next 10 years with frightening accuracy. And for the first time, that didn't comfort me. It terrified me. That night, I went home and sat in silence. No music and no screens. Just me and the life I had constructed. And I finally admitted something out loud. This works, but it doesn't answer me. The words felt heavy and honest. I began making small changes. Not impulsive ones. Intentional ones. I said no when I meant no. That I stopped volunteering for roles that drained me. That I had conversations I had postponed for years. None of it felt brave. It felt necessary. People noticed. They always do when you step out of alignment with expectation. You seem different, they said. Is everything okay? I smiled. Yes, I replied. I'm listening. Claire and I met again weeks later. Not planned. Not dramatic. We crossed paths at a small gallery opening. She looked at me and smiled. A genuine one. You look more present, she said. I feel more present, I replied. And for the first time, that wasn't something I had to think about. We walked together, not as something restarting, as two people checking in. I don't want to be a catalyst, she said at one point. I don't want you to change because of me. I nodded. I'm not changing because of you, I said. I'm changing because I finally asked myself the question you introduced. That mattered to both of us. There was no promise of a future between us. No expectation. And somehow, that honesty felt more intimate than certainty ever had. Over the following months, my life continued to shift. Not dramatically. Gradually. I didn't burn bridges. I stopped standing on them out of obligation. I didn't abandon responsibility. I redefined it. Responsibility, I learned, isn't about maintaining appearances. It's about maintaining integrity. I left the job that no longer fit me. Not for something reckless. For something aligned. The fear was real, but so was the relief. Some relationships faded. Not because of conflict. Because they no longer made sense without the version of me that existed to please. Others deepened. Because I showed up honestly, not competently. Claire remained in my life, lightly, as someone who knew me before the shift and respected me after it. We never labeled what we were. And that felt right. Some connections don't need definition to be meaningful. One evening, she asked me something familiar. Do you feel like you're living your life now? I didn't hesitate. Yes, I said. And I felt it settle in my body. I understood then that fulfillment doesn't come from certainty. It comes from responsiveness. From a life that answers when you show up honestly. Looking back, I don't regret the years I spent building stability. They taught me discipline. But I no longer confuse discipline with destiny. Some people enter your life to walk beside you. Others enter to turn you toward yourself. Claire did the latter. And that may be the most generous thing anyone can do. I used to think adulthood was about minimizing risk. Now I know it's about choosing which risks are worth taking. The life I'm building now isn't perfect, but it's awake. And for the first time, when I wake up inside it, I don't feel like a guest.